this edition of ArmCare IQ, we're going to go over part one of the integration of isometrics into an ArmCare training program. Isometrics are incredibly important for high performance in sport and in strength and conditioning. And if you like what you're listening to, please subscribe to us on YouTube, hit the like button. If you haven't already registered for our newsletter, please do so. In our newsletter, we go into deeper details of our ArmCare IQs. And we also have some really cool discounts and giveaways on our products so that you're armed and ready for this off season, because it is going to be a great one. So here we go. Let's begin. We talked already about the SPEAR concept: strength, power, endurance, asymmetry, range of motion. That is the consolidated approach to improving throwing arm health and performance, and especially improving command. But we are going to talk about isometrics because strength matters most. Remember, it starts with SPEAR, S is first, and we have to focus our training first on strength and not have it flipped and be focused on endurance. Endurance is what the athlete goes through every time that they throw, where our training needs to have a higher level of recruitment, and isometrics takes care of that. We're going to get into more detail in this particular ArmCare IQ. So first, we got to talk about isometrics as peak concentric force. You can see that isometrics divide the eccentric force production at high lengthening velocities, and then it also divides the shortening contraction force. And you can see that as the muscle shortening velocity increases as we move further on the right of this graph, you can see that the force is lowered. And that is that force velocity continuum. But where we hit the isometrics is the 0 point. That means there's no velocity happening. The joint angles aren't changing, and our isometric force is peaked. And we need to have strength there because that is the divider between achieving very high eccentric force and very high velocities, contraction velocities, and producing force at those levels. So the isometrics are right in the middle. Where we're activating, usually that's at resting muscle length, where we're able to achieve that highest force. The body is always going through this interplay of concentric and eccentric, but most of our injuries are happening with eccentric force overload. We're getting high amounts of lengthening velocity, and we're also getting very high levels of eccentric force. So we do need to train along the spectrum of eccentrics as part of our strength, isometrics as part of our strength, and concentrics as part of our strength programming. But today we're going to talk about that middle point, zero velocity isometric force. So isometrics, the ability to co-contract, this is what happens, is that all the muscle groups to create an isometric condition contract at once, so there's no movement in joints. And our body is made up of stable joints and mobile joints. Now, stable joints, they typically have a lower co-contraction effort. When you have something that's very mobile, we need to produce greater isometric force to be able to stabilize a mobile joint. And that has to be a part of our throwing programming and our ArmCare programming to ensure that we can create stability in a hypermobile joint at certain instances in the throwing delivery. And I'm going to get into some biomechanics, so you're going to see how that looks on a quantified sense. But if we're unable to create stability in mobile joints, that's where we can get altered length tension relationships. We can expose ourselves to injury, and we could lower our force potential because we can't co-contract and take slack out of muscles and tendons. So getting into the isometrics and co-contraction, I just put a visual here. So when the force is equal to the load, that means there's no change in the joint angle. There's a co-contraction around the joint. So in this particular instance, guy's got a weighted ball in his hand, biceps flexed at 90 degrees. It's not changing its angle. It's, they're able to hold the contraction there, and both the biceps and the triceps are contracting at the same time to hold that position. We see this typically in the lead leg. It's very easy to see, and a lot of high-level pitchers are able to co-contract for a longer period of time. They're able to stabilize their knee over a long period of time. You can see it on our high-speed video. We're going to get into that in a little bit. But what I want to talk about is the throwing arm, and I'm showing you a curve of external rotation. Okay, along the bottom, you can see the time points. Foot contact starts the curve. Then you have maximal external rotation at this line. Then you have ball release at this line. Then you have maximal internal rotation of the shoulder at this line. And what you're going to see in the curve is, as you look and you follow the slope, at maximal external rotation, you're going to see that there really is no slope, that you're not able to create any kind of a rate there. And then when you look at maximal internal rotation, when it gets to the 0 line, when the arm gets back to 0, there's also another non-slope area. And when we talk about isometrics, remember, we're talking about no velocity. It's at 0 velocity. That's an isometric contraction. And mathematically, we're looking at calculating angular velocity by the slopes of these angular displacement curves. So a change in angle over a change in time, so the rate of angular displacement is angular velocity. And you can see when we hit maximal external rotation at 180 degrees at this particular time point, you can see that that's an isometric position. There's actually an isometric contraction going on that is transitioning, that is taking up the slack to take the arm that's laid back and to start to activate an early rate of force development to bring the arm forward. There's an important interaction there when the arm is going back to forward. We call that, as a technical term, called amortization. It's basically the instance in which you take that rubber band and it's been stretched and it starts to then unravel again. We start shortening again. So it's that time zone where there is that transition from eccentric loading of my internal rotators to concentric action. And you can see the slope. Obviously, you should be able to see on both particular lines. The slope of external rotation is a lot more flat. So that means that the velocities, when you look at the slope of that line, are going to be less, obviously, than after maximal internal rotation. That's where we're getting arm acceleration. We're bringing it forward into internal rotation. Very sharp, steep lines. You know that there's high velocities there. Can sometimes be upwards of 7,000 degrees per second that I've seen in some research. And then we hit another stage of isometrics at 0 degrees rotation. Basically, when we're at 0 degrees rotation, if I go negative, that means I'm getting into internal rotation beyond 0. So you can also see after that period of time, it hooks back up again. So there's some external rotation that's going on after, at maximal internal rotation, we start to externally rotate. So those particular instances are isometric, they're co-contraction related, and we need to train to be good about handling that area of the delivery. That's the critical instant. The critical instant in throwing, where most of the injuries happen, are from layback to ball release, or just post ball release is where we see a lot of our injuries. And those are two elements that are connected by an isometric state. So the training must make sense that this is something that we need to do with throwing athletes. And oftentimes it's not utilized very much. Very concentric oriented training, heavily focused on endurance, light load. And this is really critical for performance. I'm going to play a video for you. I had to find this on the internet. It's tough. Please bear with me, but it's a high-speed slow motion video that you're going to actually see as the arm goes to lay back. It hits maximal external rotation, and you can see that position's held for a little while as the arm starts to adduct in the horizontal plane. So you're getting horizontal adduction where the arm is starting to come forward. That position is held. So we know we need stability there. We know we need stability in the cuff. It's a mobile joint that we need to have isometric capacity there to set ourselves up to developing high velocity and internal rotation. If there wasn't any of these instances of stop and go, stopping layback and then being able to accelerate forward, it'd be a very sloppy delivery. And this is something that's common to all throwing athletes. And the difference is, what is the range that's achieved? What's the range that an athlete can achieve in being laid back? It's like loading the catapult. Where is it held? And then boom, you're letting it go and it's exploding. So let's look at the video so you can see what's going on here. Take a look at the lead knee of this picture. You see how it's not moving? So through the delivery, it extends really late. So you can see that there is a really high co-contraction element of his lower body if you just pay attention to that. And it's interesting, in this particular picture, you'll see that those isometric positions of the lead knee, as it's co-contracted, it starts to extend in a very similar fashion to when the elbow extends in terms of internal rotation. You have some guys that are late extenders or early extenders, but this particular picture from the human eye looks like it's synced up quite well. Now let's look at the throwing arm. So when this athlete's going through the throwing arm, this is going to be a little bit like a rewind. His arm's laying back. You can see that arm is held into external rotation for a while, you know, you can see the position's held, he's starting to adduct the arm forward, and then there, he starts to internally rotate, okay? So you can see there is that isometric instant where the shoulder has to be co-contracted. We're creating tension, you know, of the internal rotators and their muscle tendon units, because we have to, you know, create this rate of force development that has to occur in throwing. The concept is called muscle slack, okay? In our bodies, our muscles and tendons, they hang. So there's a little bit of a bowing to them. They're loose. Just think of them like that. And you got to think of my arm. If I'm going to move my arm, let's say my arm's a car, or if I'm going to pull a car, I got all this rope, and your rope is your muscle tendon unit, and it's on the ground. It's completely unraveled. It's in a pile, and this car is rolling back. You know, this car's rolling back. So if my arm's a car, it's rolling back. The only way that I can create some early rate of force to be able to pull the car is I got to get the line. I got to get that rope taut. I have to get the muscle tendon unit taut to be able to then accelerate the car forward as it's rolling back. So that's the concept, that we need to be able to co-contract, and isometrics are one type of programming that teaches the body how to take out that slack and transfer. Now, there's certain other ways that you can take out muscle slack. It's pretty easy to see. You look at a vertical jump, a counter movement where you're stretch loading a muscle creates tautness because you're stretching it, and then it's contracting. You're taking the slack out of it in your stretch. But the counter movement, obviously, when we're throwing, is the rotation backwards to load the muscle. But we have to get to this place where we're tightening the rope to be able to accelerate the arm forward. And the other thing is external load. You know, I just have a picture of two baseball players squatting. One guy's got a dowel, and the other guy's got a, you know, barbell with plates on his back. Well, obviously the guy that doesn't have the external load, he doesn't have the same requirements to create tautness in the muscle tendon unit in the quads. So, you know, external load is a way in which we can take out muscle slack, but it's not useful in the sport of baseball. So it's important to have this concept that isometrics and being able to get the muscles into co-contracted states is important for throwing performance. So it needs to be in the diet of your training. So here you go. You know, we offer testing with these units. It's a portable dynamometer. You wear it on your wrist. You push into a surface, and this is fixed dynamometry. It's not a yielding dynamometry where you're trying to break, you know, your arm going through gravity. No one's trying to push against you. You're pushing into something that you're fixed into the isometrics, and you're pushing maximally. And we examine your co-contraction strength essentially in a particular muscle based on whether it's internal rotation or external rotation. And we need to really identify where there's weaknesses there, because as you can see, there are instances at maximal internal rotation, external rotation, and maximal internal rotation where you're hitting an isometric component, and you know, we need to have a lot of strength there. You know, we need to have a lot of strength there to be able to have the right muscular interactions to produce high velocity, but also decelerate well later in the delivery. And you know, we think of this as examinations. You know, we're thinking of this tool that this is a testing tool, but it's really a training tool. And we have a setting on our app called the strength tester feature. It's out there now, where you can test anything. You can do any type of isometric test. It doesn't matter. You can be as creative as you want. Doesn't hurt our data stream, but you can now utilize the exam-based device for training and get a quantified number. You now have a quantification of your isometric force in training. So you can give the athlete, you know, certain programming based on the isometrics. And that's what I would do with my particular athletes in terms of improving their isometric forces. You know, giving them a protocol where they're going to have a graded isometric program. They're going to start at 50%, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, and try to keep building that isometric strength, because it is the foundation of everything. Remember, it's the bridge between your peak eccentric force capacity, and it's the bridge to your high contractile velocities for concentric, and what force could be applied under those high speed conditions. So we need to have good isometric strength. And please go to our website if you're interested in this, or you can email us at support@armcare.com. We can get you set up. But I truly believe the isometrics are the wave of the future in improving throwing performance. And in part 2, we're going to get into some different exercises, not using the dynamometer, but that can improve the isometric strength in future. So hope everyone's doing well, and thanks for listening.